Well, hello everybody. It's Jim Alexander here from New Wave Learning. Do hope you're very, very well, and thank you very much for joining us on this webinar where we are lucky enough to speak with Raj Morjaria from Direct Line Group. I am welcoming you all. The purpose of today is we are very, very lucky. Direct Line Group and New Wave have had a fantastic relationship and approached Raj towards the back end of last year, and I asked him, we've got this opportunity to create a blended progressive learning journey all around inclusive leadership. Is this something that you would be interested in working with us? And straight away Raj said, yes, we would be very, very interested in this. And so the purpose of today is to get Raj's ideas around how inclusive leadership should look like in business, in the world, and to get his ideas and your ideas about what we can look to achieve in terms of how we influence people's actions and behaviours around the 6 signature traits and anything more around this very important topic. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Raj to say hello and just to introduce himself, his role, and more about himself as the person. So hello, Raj, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Raj Morjaria, and I look after the diversity and inclusion agenda at Direct Line Group. It's a role I've been in for about 7 months now, having previously had a kind of 15-year career in the communications space, leading our communications business partnering team. And I'm really excited about some of the work we're doing with New Wave to really get under the skin of how we truly build an inclusive culture and really going to take forward, I think, the diversity and inclusion agenda here at Direct Line Group.
Fantastic, thank you, Raj. So just sort of give you some insight about how we want this to work today. We've got a few things that we would like to get through. I've got some questions for Raj, but we also would like some of your thoughts, but we don't want to spend too much time on a webinar being too inclusive, which sounds a bit silly really, because we would like to consolidate all of the information that we might get. And so if you wouldn't mind either using the chat box or emailing us so that we can consolidate all of the insight whilst we're working through all of the questions. But at the same time, at the end of the session, we will open the floor to any questions that you might have from us and any questions that Raj might be able to answer. So hopefully we will take around about 30 minutes to kind of get Raj's input, and then we'll open the floor to any questions that you might have. So if you wouldn't mind just putting yourself on mute, not you though, Raj, because obviously we want your insight first, and then when we open everybody else's up to everyone else's questions later on, please just unmute yourself. I believe there is an option to wave at me. I might see it. In fact, why don't we just try that? If you could go to where it says manage participants, I believe that you can wave. So if I could ask people just to wave at me, and I can see whether I can see people waving. Let's try that one out. Kira's waving. Anybody else waving? Can you wave at me? People haven't worked that one out. I do believe if you go to the top, manage participants, and there should be a wave options, or in the more options. Yes, if you go to the right, more, I believe there might be a wave option. I can't see it because of my panel at the moment. Okay, so without any further ado, Raj, first and foremost, the first question I'd like to ask you is why now? D&I has been high on the agenda for some time, but why is there a need, do you think, to create more effective solutions and initiatives?
Absolutely, Jim. And I guess for me, the starting point is really looking at business context. So actually, if we look at the changing world, we look at the fact that leaders have never had to deal with so much change at so much speed, with so much kind of complexity and intensity. And I think few leaders have ever been taught or trained to lead in kind of today's VUCA world. So, you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I guess that there's kind of 3 trends that are kind of changing the game. So First is technology. So we live in a networked world where everything is connected with kind of AI and blockchain and connected devices changing everything we know. And as a result, customer expectations are changing. They expect service that is always on and information that's available at the palm of their hands. And second is attitude. So actually there's a big change or shift in ethics and expectations. So people expect more from the kind of products and services they consume and are kind of more skeptical than ever before. And we're seeing that people are kind of more socially responsible as well as being price conscious. And there's this changing expectation that businesses exist for a far greater reason than to serve their shareholders alone, that they have responsibility to society as a whole. And both of these mean that the world of work is changing. There is a changing expectation of kind of equality of opportunity and work-life balance, impacting what colleagues expect. Things such as flexible working are no longer seen as a privilege, and careers are starting to change from what may have been kind of traditionally linear ladders to kind of lattice pathways. And there's a kind of growing expectation of equality of opportunity and progression for all. And I guess all of this means that the role of leaders in business is changing. The leaders of tomorrow need to operate in a completely different way to kind of steer their organisation's success. And that means kind of moving away from perhaps some of the workplace approaches that in some instances originated from industrial times. And that means, as leaders, kind of starting to think about how you lead in a more collaborative and emotionally intelligent way, how you create a greater sense of purpose in a world of uncertainty, and how you give people a sense of belonging. Now, achieving greater diversity has been on the agenda for most big corporates for several years, and we know that's because it leads to kind of better decision making and more creativity and improved performance and increased engagement. But companies increasingly rely on diverse multidisciplinary teams to actually kind of achieve more. But increasingly we're seeing that bringing a diverse mix of people together doesn't necessarily guarantee high performance. It requires inclusion as well. And one of the kind of key ways you can create that inclusion is through inclusive leadership. So ensuring that people feel treated respectfully, valued, and they've got a sense that they belong. But actually, my sense is that most of the focus we've seen has been on the diversity agenda. And there's little that kind of goes beyond perhaps unconscious kind of bias training. So I think there's so much value in actually unlocking the power of inclusive leadership in most kind of organisations. And I think that's why it's something we're really interested in exploring and kind of looking at how we can really progress the agenda on it, Direct Line Group.
Fantastic, thank you ever so much. And so what would you say then is going to be the difference that will make the difference in terms of inclusion? Because obviously we understand the benefits of having a diverse workforce and teams working, or diverse teams working together. But what do you think is now, in the year 2020, is going to be the difference that makes the difference?
So I think we're starting to, I think all the things I've spoken about have started to kind of almost come together. And we're seeing this growing pressure and this growing war for talent. And actually, it's those organizations that can create an inclusive culture that can actually kind of demonstrate externally and demonstrate visibly the type of culture that they're creating and the way that they manage their organizations, I think are absolutely those organizations that will succeed.
Yes. Okay, great stuff. So if we could look at the inclusive leadership model, which for those of you that might know was some research done by Deloitte around the signature traits of inclusive leadership. And those are commitment, courage, cognizance of bias, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. If we were to take those 6 and actually really understand what kind of actions and behaviours we would specifically see of people, I'd like to firstly start with the trait of commitment, and just ask you, Raj, in terms of your experience, how committed do you think people are to be inclusive right now, and what possibly is getting in the way of people being committed?
So I guess my kind of starting point is I think it's variable. I think it's variable generally in the business world. I think it's variable certainly for us in Direct Line Group. And I think part of that is because diversity and inclusion mean different things to different people. I think it starts with an understanding of what diversity and inclusion means specifically to your business and then to you kind of personally. And my sense is that in a lot of organisations, the definition of diversity and inclusion can be quite vanilla, and it's very difficult to move beyond textbook definitions. And that's why one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment is really getting under the skin of, well, what does diversity and inclusion mean to us at Direct Line Group? What are the outcomes we want to see? And what's our diversity and inclusion story that's ultimately grounded in our organisational vision and purpose? And we see that being something key that will help people connect with the story, gain buy-in and get everyone involved. I think, individually, personal experience also comes into play. So actually, I think if you yourself or you've seen someone around you who's experienced discrimination, who hasn't had the same kind of opportunity in life, who's been a part of in and out groups, who's struggled to have their voice heard, I think you can actually kind of relate to inclusion more, and that then impacts your own kind of personal perspective on things. And I think for me, that there's a sense of you have to bring the head in terms of that vision and understanding, and the heart in terms of that real personal connection together to really get commitment, because ultimately, it takes time and energy to focus on being inclusive. And actually, unless you're kind of bringing together that connection through the head and the heart, you're not going to be invested in actually kind of creating the time and devoting the energy to really think about kind of being inclusive. I guess if I go to your second question around what's getting in the way, I think again there's a bit of a lack of an understanding around positive action. From a kind of diversity perspective, to remove barriers and create a level playing field versus positive discrimination. And over the past number of years, we've seen, various specific focus areas with diversity. So gender and financial services being a kind of massive focus area. But some of the kind of insight we're seeing, and certainly I've seen in other organisations, is that the way that these initiatives are perhaps being managed can sometimes alienate groups of people. It's when things are done without context or in an opaque way that can be counterproductive. So, for example, recruitment targets have often been a big thing in achieving kind of greater gender diversity, particularly at the senior levels. But unless they're explained, unless that positive action is really explained and you build the understanding around that, you immediately come up against the barrier of kind of positive discrimination. And actually, if anything, you create that mindset that takes things away from creating equality of opportunity for all.
Right, yeah. And that makes total sense. So if I was to try and summarise that very, very briefly, the first thing you talked about is kind of understanding from an organisational level its own strategy and story, and then allowing people to kind of dial up their commitment depending on what that story is and how it resonates with them emotionally in terms of their own kind of personal messaging and responsibility and morals.
Absolutely.
And it's a very, very interesting piece around what things are getting in the way. And I suppose that would be really interesting to understand from other people's perspectives, what examples of within their own organisations might be getting in the way. So please do message us on the chat or open up your email and put in some of your insights there. That would be very, very, very interesting to kind of understand what is getting in the way, because that's one thing that we want to obviously overcome. If I can move on to another trait within inclusive leadership, and that would be courage. A question that comes to mind, Raj, is what are we not being courageous about in terms of inclusive leadership?
So I think that's a really, really big question. And I guess often I think that there can be a mismatch between you know, your expressed corporate intent and actually kind of leadership behaviours and the behaviours that people within an organisation see kind of demonstrated every day. So an example of that might be unconscious bias in hiring decisions or kind of internal promotions, and it's that kind of that double speak that can kind of disengage. I think, you know, courageous leaders are those who kind of almost buck the trend and challenge themselves, their peers in the organisation. And it's, you know, those people who don't turn a blind eye to something and actually are those ones who kind of are radically candid and actually do provide that feedback. And that's not always kind of easy. That's not always easy to do. And I think, you know, for me, it's openness that's absolutely key. And you know, we certainly see within our leadership group, we have those leaders who are courageous, who are open, who do kind of challenge the status quo. And I think the more of that you see, the more you see things being kind of called out, the more it kind of builds that organisational culture of actually, you know, this is the right thing to do.
And obviously, without being too explicit, and you've seen that in action. And does that? I'm assuming that, you know, behaviour breeds behaviour. So the more that we see of it, the easier it's going to become over time. But obviously, time is of the essence, right?
Absolutely, and I guess for me, you know, at the heart of this is you know, leaders being human and vulnerable, and that means, you know, admitting mistakes and signalling that it's okay to get things wrong and learn from them. And you often see in the corporate world, particularly in larger organisations, leaders and teams can get caught up in the kind of rigmarole of kind of managing a message internally, and that can be counterproductive and energy zapping. So actually, you know, understanding that things can go wrong, welcoming challenge personally as leaders and different viewpoints, and seeing this as a kind of positive thing, and actually, I think also not getting hung up on hierarchy, and actually, you know, as a leader, looking to form kind of relationships within kind of all levels of the organisation is something that I think can help with personal growth and insight, and kind of help to demonstrate greater courage. There's actually an example that probably comes to mind, and if I go back a couple of years now, and as an organisation, we were kind of implementing a new kind of IT system, and as with most big kind of IT implementations, it wasn't without its challenges, and there were times when actually, you know, the systems were down, the systems were going slow, it was difficult for people, and actually for a period, the kind of message that people were hearing was very much around, oh, but you know what, the data shows we're not that bad, and actually, everything we look at shows us that we're only down for kind of 0.1% of the time, rather than actually kind of almost having that courage to say, look, there are some things that have gone wrong. This is what we did well. This is the thinking that we did, and actually, we did get these things wrong, and we know it's impacting you. And actually, we're doing everything we can to kind of turn it around. Now, that is the messaging we kind of got to eventually, and actually showing that kind of vulnerability almost means that people, I think, were more accepting of the fact that, look, we're all in this together, and it turned the kind of tide away from this accusatory kind of almost view around IT not delivering or supporting, through to actually, look, we're all in this together. How do we work together to support our customers? And I think for me, that's one kind of micro example of actually, as a leader, when you show some vulnerability, when you show your human side, that's when people kind of connect. That's when people understand, and that's when you can actually achieve more.
Yeah, it's a shame that the word vulnerability doesn't begin with a C, because how do we, maybe vulnerability and courage should be in the same breath. I completely agree.
Absolutely.
You know, in order to create more psychologically safe cultures, we do need to show our human side, and humans are vulnerable, and we don't know the answers, and we do have blind spots, and it's okay to challenge them internally and externally, and enable that conversation to be had. So I completely agree. You've mentioned unconscious bias, and in terms of the 6 signature traits, we've got cognizance of bias. Now, highly inclusive leaders are mindful of personal and organisational blind spots and self-regulate to help ensure fair play. Where are we going wrong with present day initiatives around unconscious bias?
So I think unconscious bias is a really interesting area, and it's an area that I've certainly been looking into over the past few months. And I think all the kind of insight that I've seen shows that, look, unconscious bias training can raise awareness, but there's actually little evidence that shows it changes behaviour, and actually there's some evidence that shows it can backfire. So I remember reading about a study where students gave a tougher rating to kind of older job hunters after watching a diversity training video that asked them to suppress unfavourable ideas about the elderly. And it can also, I think, once people have gone through this training, it can create a view that actually I've been trained on unconscious bias, and therefore I'm no longer susceptible to the biases as I've been trained. And the reality is that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think, an example that really sums it up for me is, I think most of us understand that it's important to eat healthy diets. We have an understanding of what a healthy diet looks like, but that doesn't always mean we eat a healthy diet, because actually bridging that gap is kind of tricky. And I think for me that kind of means that unconscious bias training it does have its place. But for me, the most effective strategies probably do two things. I think one, they support self-regulation. So leaders understand that they're biased, and when they're most vulnerable to bias. So it's something that is at the back of their mind, and it means that they can kind of try to keep that in check. But I think secondly, and probably more importantly, is how do organisations think about focusing on kind of processes and procedures to remove bias, so you don't rely on self-regulation alone. So for example, when you're looking at the recruitment process, how do you do things such as anonymising information, other than skills and experiences, to help remove that inherent bias that will creep in? When you're running your assessment or interview process, how do you ensure that's running in an impartial way, and actually, run through a diverse set of people, using kind of hiring panels, and again, then how do you look at that kind of same methodology for internal processes for things such as pay and performance? And I think it's where you keep those kind of those two things, where you kind of try to manage those two things together, and certainly on the kind of self-regulation piece, try to keep that in check on an ongoing basis. That you can actually kind of really kind of make an impact and make a difference.
Fantastic. You've kind of answered my second question around what kind of initiatives do you know that are working and why. So thank you ever so much. If we can move on to curiosity, which is another trait of inclusive leadership. What kind of behaviours would you want to see from leaders who are curious? What kind of things would we see and hear people saying and see them doing?
So I guess there's a sense for me around, as a leader, it's very easy to get caught up in the here and now, and many leaders we see kind of almost go into delivery mode, focus on delivery, and actually I think being curious takes time and effort. And I spoke about the kind of the VUCA world that we live in. I think it's only by looking at that world and seeking to understand it from different perspectives that leaders can actually see alternative possibilities.
Yeah, and I think it's quite easy just to kind of blinker yourself off or close yourself off and just sort of say, no, that won't work, or yes, that will work. And I think it's a shame that when people are not curious enough to look at different ways of working. Okay, I'm very conscious of time because it's 24 minutes past 2 already. So if we wouldn't mind, we've got two other areas that we'd like to look at. One is cultural intelligence and one is collaboration. So let's look at cultural intelligence. I'm really keen, Raj, to understand what your kind of version of cultural intelligence is and how you would explain it to a wider population.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you know, for me at the heart of this is understanding differing perspectives, whatever might be causing those differing perspectives, and how your own style and preferences impacts your kind of view in the world in relation to those perspectives, and similarly how that can apply to others. And by different perspectives, it can be a whole range of things. So, you know, one of the things that comes to mind immediately for me is companies' own culture. So actually, we know that organizations have their own cultures, and anyone who joins a new organization probably spends the first few weeks deciphering its cultural code and norms and what's acceptable and what's not. And then within most large organizations, you'll have subcultures as well. So, you know, you can sometimes see the sales teams don't talk to the engineers, or the PR people kind of lose patience with the lawyers. And actually, you know, different departments, divisions, geographical regions, they can all have their own kind of cultures that are kind of almost informed over time and are based on, you know, differing sets of values. But in the same sense, you've also got differing groups who will have different perspectives on life, different viewpoints on the world. And then, you know, you overlay that with actually geographically, there's different kind of almost cultural norms and accepted ways of doing things. And for me, you know, being culturally intelligent is about really understanding that there are lots of different perspectives of play and different ways of thinking, different ways of doing things, and it's kind of recognizing that they all add value in their different way.
Yeah, and in fact, if you align the curiosity piece to the cultural intelligence piece, you have to get curious in order to understand how different people operate, what their cognitive diversity is like, what their cultural diversity, and becoming intelligent around, you know, different styles at play and how we can all work together in the most impactful and effective way. So I suppose there is a complete thread that runs along through all of these signature traits. If we can all work on them together, the better it will be for all of us.
Absolutely.
So I suppose, what would you expect to see from a leader who has cultural intelligence?
So I guess there's probably kind of three things that kind of come to mind. There's the first is probably an ability to put themselves in the shoes of others. So actually really wanting to kind of not just listen, but also understand different perspectives. So listening to stories, listening to experiences, and I guess, you know, as a related point is actually going out of their way to do that. So actually, we see some of our kind of more committed leaders, those leaders who are engaging with different kind of groups of people across our organisation, and that might be, you know, that might be some of our kind of employee networks that focus on ethnicity. It might be, you know, our networks that are running kind of pride events. It might be our networks that are really kind of focused on mental health. It's really kind of seeking out those groups and actually participating in the things that are doing and seeking to understand their perspective. And I guess, you know, thirdly, that there's a very important, I think, kind of follow-on point to inclusion, which is belonging.
Yes.
So actually, yeah. So it's one thing to, you know, be included in something, and it's another to feel like your opinion is really valued, and actually that you kind of truly, you know, truly belong. And for me, kind of those leaders who are kind of culturally intelligent, really understand that, and they break down those barriers, and they help people to feel like they belong and feel comfortable in who they are, but they also create that climate and that environment that means that others across the organisation seek to do the same.
Yes. So interesting that I've written down belonging, and why do you think suddenly we've got diversity and inclusion and belonging now? And again, you've answered the question that has been on the tip of my tongue, so thank you so much, Raj. Lastly, collaboration. What needs changing in how people are working together currently then?
So again, I think that's a really kind of big question, and there's probably I think a few things that kind of come to mind. The first for me is is actually around kind of organizational structure and construct. So again, I'm talking from the perspective of kind of larger organizations, but you can often find that organizational construct and structure and the ways of doing things can create silos and pull people in different directions. And you know, how often do you hear about internal politics within an organization getting in the way of getting things done? So there's something there about kind of how an organization is set up, and whether that kind of almost fosters collaboration and collaborative working, or whether that actually kind of almost drives siloed thinking and siloed working. I think the follow-on point for me is around empowerment, and as a leader, whether you're focused on kind of empowering your people to come together and kind of solve things so they can make their own decisions about the issues that are impacting their work, or whether you're constraining that, and whether you're being directive, and whether essentially you're stifling that kind of collaboration. And I think thirdly, that there's something I guess around leadership that says to me around it is about teaming, and actually I see too few leaders really thinking about and being disciplined about diversity of thinking as they're bringing teams together, or creating project teams, or kind of recruiting, and actually, you know, for all of the focus on you know, identifying different thinking styles and all of the kind of you know, MBTIs and heart styles and all the things that, you know, many teams will go through, often that doesn't then get taken forward and isn't used in an effective way when you're thinking about kind of building you know, building teams. And I guess for me, when you bring all of that together, there's quite an interesting point around we're seeing, you know, I'm certainly seeing more and more businesses starting to think and adopting kind of agile ways of working. So where you have different people from, I guess, different work verticals coming together to work on a kind of project or initiative where they're setting their own goals, where they're setting their own timelines, where they're holding each other to account, where they're truly empowered to come together and work together and deliver for the organization. And I think, you know, we've certainly got pockets of that within our organization that we've been experimenting with and testing, and the results have been outstanding. That when you kind of, you know, when you create the space for people to really work together and remove some of the organizational constraints that block it, they can achieve an incredible amount.
And so my question would be, what are the organisational constraints that do block it? So how do we encourage more of this stuff, and how do we understand where people's different thinking styles and the strengths that they have can go to make a really effective agile team?
And I guess there's a, you know, there's a starting point for me that is probably around trust. So effective collaboration, you know, for me is rooted in the sense of trust, and actually kind of a belief that that everybody, you know, that people want to genuinely work together, and everybody is working towards the same common goal. So there's something for me around creating personal connection, and it goes back to I think the human side of leadership, where people are forming human bonds with leaders, with colleagues across the organisation. So actually you've got those kind of personal connections that I think then foster collaboration. I think there's also a related point around psychological safety. So, you know, collaboration hinges on people's willingness to come together and achieve goals together, but that can only happen in an environment, you know, where you have got that trust, where you have got that pride, and you have got that kind of camaraderie, and people need to feel, I guess, safe to give and receive genuine, constructive feedback, being aligned behind kind of common goal. And I think there's a third point for me around, you know, what does collaboration look like is it goes back to the point around teaming and bringing teams together. So actually, organisationally, for me, you have to create that environment to bring teams together to solve problems. And actually, you have to create those opportunities for cross-functional collaboration. And every time I've seen it kind of enacted in the business world, every time I've seen it enacted within our organisation, things get done quicker than you'll ever believe. New solutions are kind of created, and you get that personal sense of kind of investment that can help you address some of the kind of tough challenges that businesses or your business may be facing.
Wow, and I suppose as you were talking then, I was thinking perhaps that is true collaboration, what you've just described there, and what we might be guilty of is accepting that collaboration is not collaboration when it is just cooperation.
Absolutely. There's an example that for me kind of, it comes to mind. We have a kind of idea generation platform across our organization. It's called Idea Lab, and it was born out of the thought that anybody within our company can generate can come up with an idea to kind of make things better. And I think it was launched. We've had it up and running for about 3 years now, and it was launched with some skepticism around what it could actually deliver. But what we've seen over the years is we've had cross-functional teams coming together, working together, building on each other's ideas, commenting on each other's ideas, and things getting kind of taken forward. And it's amazing that some of the ideas that have been generated on there have, in terms of cost, saved our organisation millions, and in terms of value, improved some of the kind of processes or sticking points that actually, unless somebody on our kind of, on the front line who's dealing with their customers every day had raised, probably would never have got spotted. So actually, for me, there's a real demonstration there in the power of actually, bringing different people together to kind of work on problems and get them addressed.
And does that work? Are people just autonomous? Is that autonomous teams, and then people are all leading together on a particular project?
It's autonomous teams. So actually, any idea that comes up, anybody within the organisation has the opportunity to comment and say, actually, I'm interested in that. I want to be part of the team that makes that happen. And then we do have, as you would expect, different contact points across the business that we kind of feed ideas into, and who will actually kind of respond on things and say, actually, great idea. We're already thinking about this, or great idea, let's feed it into this wider project, or great idea, not something we'd thought of. So actually you get this kind of ecosystem of continual kind of innovation and kind of ideas kind of bubbling up that everybody has the opportunity to contribute to.
Wow. That's incredible. And what, some amazing successes obviously being realized at the moment. So Raj, so much richness already in terms of the conversation that we've had exploring the 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. So thank you so much. And I think I'm going to have to listen back to this, because some of the kind of content that you've delivered already and got us to think about, I'm going to have to take away and really kind of refine to kind of understand what kind of objectives we can start to look at in terms of the richness of your delivery. So thank you. I'd like to open it up to the floor and just ask people, because I'm assuming that we've got people that are also rich in terms of their thinking in this space. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Raj right now, or any observations or insights they would like to share with the group? Because we've got literally about 7 minutes left. So please do speak now. People working how to unmute themselves. I believe you go up to the bar. Let's have a look. Where's the bar gone? You go to the furthest right, you have a mute, sorry, the furthest left, you'll have a mute button. So if anyone does have any questions, please do say something. Raj, you're that good that nobody has any questions. That's quite impressive. Raj, is there any other questions you'd like to ask us in terms of creating more of a conversation? Have you got any thoughts? I'm assuming people can connect with you on LinkedIn.
So absolutely. I mean, I guess my sense as I start, as I think about inclusive leadership, I think about the kind of different traits is actually, there is a sense for me when I think about leaders, leaders are all different and they'll all be in different places. So there's absolutely something that I have at the back of my mind that thinks, if you're creating an inclusive leadership program, how do you get to the heart of where somebody is at, and then how do you create and how do you help them kind of move forward in perhaps the kind of areas that are their blind spots or weaknesses, and how do you help them to kind of build upon their strengths and share them with others. that's almost been the thought at the kind of back of back of my mind. And the other thing for me is, look, the stuff we're talking about here is stuff that's deeply embedded in, I think, the kind of human psyche, and isn't stuff that you can change, overnight. So actually, for me, I think you talk about inclusive leadership. It goes hand in hand with some of the kind of broader leadership traits and some of the broader things that you might think about in terms of building effective leadership and engagement within an organisation. And I think for me, this is all stuff that takes time, and it takes sustained effort. So I guess my kind of final thought is, look, we're on a journey. I think there's been lots of progress, but there is kind of far more to do. And I'm more than happy if anybody wants to connect with me on LinkedIn to discuss any of the kind of points I've raised today, or kind of talk about diversity and inclusion more generally. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time today, Raj. And I totally agree with you that these kind of initiatives and learning programs are much more of a journey rather than just an event, and it is going to take time. And if we can influence people around this over a period of time, it will only go to make the world a better place. So I'm really, really thankful for your time, your input, as always. I think we'll stop it there, as we've got literally 2 minutes to go, and we can all give you around about 2 or 3 minutes back of your day. We have recorded this. Please do email us at info@newwavelearning.com with any other kind of observations, thoughts, and please do connect with Raj on LinkedIn. And I will bid you farewell. And Raj, thank you again for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. So,
thanks, Jim.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.